Okay, so for today, and the purposes of looking at a service catalogue, we're going to look at a genuine use case. There is some theory in here, but we'll try and make it practical. And we're going to do that through a genuine case study that we applied to a company called Pets at Home. Anyone heard of Pets at Home?
Yeah.
Anyone worked at Pets at Home before?
No.
No, okay, right. I was just checking. They have permitted me to use this, okay, so it is okay. They went through a huge growth during the pandemic. Absolutely massive growth. Bit of a sad story in the last year of what's happened on the back of that in terms of some of the pets being returned or found in new homes. But during the pandemic, huge growth. And what I'm going to do is going to go through what happened in that organisation and the support we provided to try and get to the point they truly understood the risk that their IT operation had at that time. The growth was there. What was the risk and the part that the service catalogue played in that? Okay, so as we go through that, I'll interject the different elements from the case study. So I'm going to go through the challenge itself. We'll go through our approach to reducing risk using service catalogue at the heart. There is a little video. It is a bit salesy. I do apologise. It's a bit cute as well. It's better than my monotone voice, so we'll put that on at the end. It's only a couple of minutes, and then we'll do a little summary as well. Is that okay for an agenda? Yeah, and if there's time at the end, we will switch into some of the automation aspects. So the challenge. So Pets at Home, doing really well during the pandemic in terms of opportunity and growth and serving the pet care industry. Huge focus is all about the pets. The amount of Zoom and WebEx calls that we had and Teams calls where the pets would just walk across the screen on a regular basis. It was all about the pets. The culture there is fantastic, what they focus on. And a new CIO had come in. They'd gone through acquisitions. They'd gone through lots of changes. And the CIO wanted to understand, what should I be worried about? What could potentially I get fired for? What could I be put in jail for? What's my concerns here? And we were brought in to do a quick fire assessment of where that worry really should be. The approach we took is what we call our accelerated deliverables to ensure that self-sufficiency is there at the end. We don't want to be there forever and a day. That client Pets at Home, they need to be able to operate it. So we deliver through them to enable them to be successful. We know what good looks like in certain areas of service management. We've got tried and tested blueprints, we call them accelerated blueprints, and we use them with Pets at Home to understand what changes need to be made and what's the best way of implementing that solution for them. So that's the background, a bit about what they're trying to achieve. So the approach is a 6-step model. The first part is service catalogue. Let's start by understanding what services Pets at Home provide and what are the most important services. And we do that through then a criticality assessment. We then have to map those services, understand what underpins each of those priority services, to then be able to perform a risk assessment. You can't just start off with a risk assessment at the top level and say, what's the risk of my service? Because a service is not necessarily a tangible thing at that time. You've got to look at the components that underpin it. Then you can produce a portfolio of risk reduction projects, and then you can drive in continued improvement, thereby ensuring you can constantly manage your risk. Okay, so I'm now going to go through each one in turn, explain a little bit more, put some examples up, and for the first one, we'll go through some of the theory that sits behind it as well. Is that okay? Yeah. Right, dare I move? No, I won't touch it. It's just a bit of a lean. So the first one around it is the service catalogue. Now, there are 7 different types of IT service within any organisation. I will zoom in on that in a minute, okay? So I appreciate you can't read that now. And it's essential that organisations appreciate the variances between those 7. Because if you just had a single service catalogue, you won't necessarily appreciate the variations of the service levels that may apply, the components that underpin, the expectations that your user community may have from those different types of service. So it's essential you get that understanding correct. And ultimately, it's got to align to the definition of what is a service. Anyone ITIL qualified here? Good start. Can anyone remember the definition of an IT service?
Something that enables value to be produced.
Ultimately, yeah, without the responsibility or burden of the costs associated to it. Exactly that. It's a mouthful, isn't it? Yeah, but thank you for remembering it. At least that's one person you wanted to remember. I struggle sometimes to remember it as well. There it is, exactly. So what we try and translate it to is something more meaningful. What the users physically see, use, and consume or request. Yeah, make it tangible. They've got to be able to interact with it some way. They've got to log on to it or request it. They've got to be able to see that. That's what a genuine IT service is. And once you've got that appreciation of a definition of a service, you can then start to build your catalog. Okay. So that's the starting point. Before I go into the 7 different types in more detail, any questions so far? Okay, right, let's zoom in then. Hopefully you'll be able to see us okay at the back. I will talk through it. To start with, we're going to go to number 7. The reason for that is that everyone pretty much thinks of number 7 as the service catalogue on its own. And that's what you call your requestable service or your request catalogue. Yeah, everyone got one of those? Everyone got a service portal in their organisation? You can go on and get them. Yeah, service portal, okay. Most organisations, yeah, comprehensive. It should be, yeah. This is your largest area of opportunity for automation as well. If we get a bit more time at the end, I can go through that. This huge opportunity. If you've defined your requestable services, you should also have a defined form that captures all the information from the user up front, a defined fulfillment workflow that goes to the relevant people within the organization to fulfill each step. It may be multiple steps. You should have a service level around the fulfillment timeframe. It shouldn't be about priority. It should be about actually this thing that you request, it will take this amount of time. It's a bit like your Amazon shopping experience. You go in there, you know what you need to get. And because you've got all that in place, that is absolutely right for automation. Lots of automation tools that are out there, UiPath and Blue Prism and others that can go in there, link into your service management tool set to support automation of those steps. In terms of the self-service capability for these, you should get to 95% plus of your requestable services being raised through self-service mechanisms. So that's either a bot, some kind of voice bot or chat bot, or your service portal. When was the last time you phoned Amazon to place an order? Yeah, you don't. It should be through that route. If your agents are spending time handling those kind of queries, it's a waste of their time. Okay. So that's a huge area of automation opportunity. Lots of AI capabilities being built into that as well. Any questions on request services? Yeah. Okay. All right. The next 5, they can all break. Okay, they're things that you provide that can break, and therefore you can have incidents raised against them. The first 2 fundamentally underpin the business capability, the business processes that your organizations are there to do, the value that your organizations offer, the money that your organizations make. Okay, and the first one is the biggest. Typically, it takes up about 50% of the cost base of an IT operation, and that's what we call business application services. It's a generic term that's used. Lots of tools use slightly different naming conventions. For those anyone use ServiceNow in here? I know it's a dirty word maybe for some people, but okay, so that's the market typically. We did a recent survey, it's about 35% of the market ServiceNow. Actually, ServiceNow themselves say it's about 40%. But they've got something called CSDM, Common Service Data Model, really good. It structures how you're meant to list your services, your components, your business capabilities, not just looking at ITSM, but entire platform. Other tools out there do something similar, but it's not necessarily quite as robust yet. But the principles that we're promoting here are generic across that. We're completely agnostic for the tool sets.
You count cybersecurity as part of a business application service?
If the application that's being used to support cybersecurity exists, then yes, that would be in that.
So it can like a VPN client, similar would maybe consider application.
If someone can physically come back to that definition of service, if someone can see it, interact with it, and end user, not necessarily a technician internally, then yes, it would match that definition. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, interesting about business application, put a couple of examples in here. You got a company website. Yeah, that's end user facing. IT don't necessarily provide that. You provide that probably to the sales and marketing function of your organization, and they then provide that website out. But you fundamentally provide it as your IT operation. You've got what we call corporate IT services, such as your HR system, ServiceNow, EasyVista, Sherwell, Avanti. They're all corporate systems, finance systems, Oracle Fusion, etc. Your email solution, which is a shared service, that's something people can physically see and interact with. They do that on a per minute per day. That is a service. Now, all of these run on infrastructure, whether that's cloud-based or on-prem or managed service provision. And the service commitments, service levels that we associate to these are all about availability. Okay, and we try and translate that, and I'll go through a bit later on. Rather than talking about percentages, which are quite theoretical, let's talk about in a language that users understand. Lost hours, lost minutes. Why not even take that further? Lost profit, lost revenue, lost productivity. Yeah, translate it into a language they understand. Percentages, a bit too theoretical, doesn't mean much. So we'll expand on that a bit. So that's the first type. Any questions on that one? No, that's typically where your largest risk exists as well, but there are more. The next one, location connectivity or office connectivity related services. Now, back in 1990s, noughties kind of language, you probably would get this situation where someone phone up and say, my application, my business application isn't working. And it's probably because, or it was at the time in some certain scenarios, that the office network was down. It wasn't necessarily Wi-Fi at that time, it was just your Ethernet cable plugged in, your network was down. And how many people back in that day would then produce a report to say this business application X, let's call it, was unavailable? Yeah, it's not unavailable, it's just your network's down. Modern world, just go to Starbucks around the corner, you can log onto the Wi-Fi there securely, and then away you go, you can use a service. You're working from home remotely. Yeah, it's available, it's just the network that you were using was not working at the time. So you need to separate the service boundaries between the two. The network connectivity is a different service, whether that's Wi-Fi or land-based. You've got different solutions being provided to your organization's office locations.
Couldn't you argue then that some of those location activities are actually business application services? Because, for example, depending on your customer, if you, for example, if you have a customer who says you must work on my site to access all my systems because you're a third-party consultant, if their location connectivity goes down, i.e. their network, you can't do your job because you can't access their business critical services. So aren't those two just slight variations of the same thing?
Not quite, they're separate service boundaries. Separate, even if you're mandated to work from their office location, the service that isn't working if you're going to the office location is your location connectivity service. The applications that you would access from there are perfectly available. Maybe someone else sitting next to you can use it absolutely fine for whatever reason. Yeah, so they're separate, different service boundaries. That's your network, that's your cabling and everything that goes within it, your SD-WAN if you're going down that path as well. The only area of overlap is your network within the data center. Yeah, the network within the data center is a fundamental component of the data center where your applications are being hosted. Therefore, if that goes down, absolutely, that is part of your application service. But your office network, no, completely separate service boundary. Yeah, okay. Okay, the next one, sticking with locations or offices, is your equipment within that office. Not assigned to you as a named individual, it's assigned to the office. It's a shared device, like a printer, or this laptop, I think, is a shared device. Yeah, it's there, it's used. The AV equipment as well may well be part of your IT operation, therefore that's covered under this space. Talking about a laptop or a polyspan phone in the sense of availability doesn't make sense. It's not real. 99% available. What does that mean? What people want to know, if that didn't work there, it took a bit of time to get sorted out, how long does it take to get resolved? Yeah, it took about 10 minutes in the end to get all that sorted. But that's because I've got an on-site technician sitting here that was able to do that. Yeah, you've costed that into the cost of the operation of that device and everything else in the location. You've costed that in because you've got an on-site engineer. If that really didn't work, next step would be to hot swap it, replace it. Yeah, bring in another device and away you go. So therefore, the language that users want to talk in is, how quickly can you sort my damn thing out, please? Not in the sense of availability. Yeah. So that's a completely different language compared to the first two we've talked about. And then linking to that, the fourth one is other kit devices, is user assigned. We call them workplace user assigned typically. That is stuff, it's not just your hardware, your kit, it's also your software, your desktop software that sits on it. It's not sitting on any form of infrastructure. It's not a business application. It's desktop, like Adobe Reader, for example. That's your stuff that sits in here. It's assigned to a named individual. It's your device, whether that's a temporary measure or a permanent measure. And you, again, want to know, if this breaks, how quickly can you sort it out, please? I don't want to talk about 99% availability on my laptop or my mobile phone, for example. Yeah. Okay. All right, there is a fifth, often forgotten about, and we call them report and data feed services. Bit nuanced, yeah, and understandable why sometimes it's forgotten about. And this is where you've got a situation where a report has been built, it's been coded, it's been developed, and it gets issued to someone, could be completely an external person or another person within your organization, and they receive it at a certain time, every day, week, month, whatever the frequency is set. Or, could anyone work in a university here before, currently? Yeah, at the back there. UCAS, major thing just happened over the last couple of months, yeah. Each university has to send data to UCAS a couple of times a year. that is a data feed. It's effectively a program. It's like an application in its own right, but it's a programmed feed of data that goes into a system that's a third party. That's the second part. Automated data feed is in there. Now, talking about availability, that again isn't quite right. Yeah, you might talk about how quickly you could resolve the issues. Okay, fair enough. You would still have that principle there. But it's really about timeliness of delivery. Did it turn up on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock when it's meant to? So that's what was it corrupt? Was it missing data? Yes, your service levels around that would again be different compared to the other sets of services we were just talking through. Okay, is that all right? Yeah.
How would you see that compared to less obviously data feed integration services?
So
basically, that kind of what I'm thinking here is, I mean, quite a lot of the work that I do is getting data into an ITSM tool. So things like CMDB, automatic population from various data sources, right? So presumably that would fit under the data feed service.
That would be in here because it's a component to component. Because the definition of a service is what someone physically sees, uses, and interacts with. If there's a data feed from one app component to another app component, that is a component mapping that sits underneath. It's not seen by the end user. The difference with that UCAS example I gave you is absolutely UCAS are seeing it. They're the customer. The university is providing it to their customer, which is UCAS in their data set. If it's internal within your operation, it's just a data feed underneath the bonnet of a service in the application space. I might be able to leave on that a little bit more later when I talk through the mappings.
Okay. Yeah,
okay.
Cool.
Someone's got to see it. A report, someone sees it. You see it. You physically see it. The data feed that goes outside of your organization, someone should absolutely see that as well. Okay. Right. So those are the 5 that can break. On your, you all said you had service ports. That's good. Hands up here in terms of the ability for a user to log an incident, to report an issue. So it's not a request, it's an incident. How many people here currently ask the user to select the IT service that they're experiencing the issue with? Yeah, a few. Yeah, thank you. Okay, you've got other tools and technology. You've got predictive intelligence where you can just go free format. Yeah, just freestyle it. Someone types in those stuff and you try and interpret it. No matter how great the tools are, some of them are great. It's still not where you want it to be. It's still free. We call them hand grenades. Throw them over the fence to IT. One of the agents will have to pick that up, put the pin back in, and go, "What do I do now?" Invariably, what do they do? After they put the pin back in it, what do you think the agent would do next?
Contact the user.
Contact the user. Yeah, they'll go back to the user. The user go, "Oh, I should have put that in my first original message." They'll go back again. You may have a to and fro in a while. You probably lost 3 or 4 days by the time you actually get an understanding of what the bloody thing is that we need to sort out. Yeah, avoid that. Hand grenade requests, free format data. It's lovely in theory from a user perspective, but you need to have that more structured to enable, again, thinking about automation and AI capabilities to come off the back of that. So logging it against or prompting the user to log it against the IT service they're experiencing the issue with can help with automation. Picture this. Users dropped their device, smashed it to pieces. Contact IT, free format, you probably have that to and fro. However, if you ask the user for the impacted service, which is my device, and a symptom, which is damaged, do you think the agent, a service desk agent, can do anything with it? Can't do much. On-site support can do something with it, yeah. The gentleman that came here, go straight to, why do you want to spend time for an agent, a remote agent, playing around with that incident when you could also route it directly to on-site support? We could then fix that issue really quickly for that user. Yeah. You may want to introduce some other levels of automation, which is really neat. Why don't you spin up a virtual desktop for the user as a temporary measure? If they've got access to another device, maybe a home device, spin that up, give it to them for a day, whilst you then provide them with a fix for the laptop they've got, a replacement. Take it a step further, have a DigiLocker in an office, yeah, and just give them a code and go, well, there we go, just go and get a replacement now, all sorted for you. There are other automation capabilities that are available to you. Okay.
How does that work with VIPs? Because in most organizations, for example, you get to a certain level, and I don't know, Microsoft Word doesn't save your document. And the first thing most senior VIPs will do is they'll go to IT support and go, "Help, my Word document has to save." They won't check the standard Word save files. They won't even reopen Word. First thing they do is just run to IT support and go, "Help," even for stuff that is not even in IT support's gift. Like I was talking to an IT support team of mine, and apparently somebody went into support and went, "Help, my car's broken, can you fix it?" And they were quite a senior level manager, and they're turning around being like, no matter with all best will in the world, they've tried to educate people, and somebody still put in an IT support ticket saying, "Help, my car is broken." Like, how do you?
Just a question, Josh. You obviously work for a place that has the concept of VIP.
Yeah.
How many people do? Wow, that's a lot higher than I was expecting, to be honest. Yeah.
So that point is critical. VIP services divide opinion. Yeah, from an ethical perspective, from a morality perspective, should we be treating our senior executives in a VIP status compared to someone else? We're all here to do a job and do that. For some organisations, absolutely the right thing to do. For others, maybe not. I could probably spend another 45 minutes going through an approach to VIP servicing and resolve, and maybe we can have a chat a bit later on, but it'll probably take up a little bit too much of the time today. But it does divide opinion, but there are some techniques around it. Okay. All right, so the final one, which is very different from all the others, what we call departmental functional services. Okay, you can see it, you can interact with it, but it's not an application, it's not a device, it's not something you can request. The most common one that every organisation has, or IT organisation has, is your service desk. You can see it. You can sometimes physically walk up to it if the service desk is located in the office. You can phone them, you can chat to them. Can you talk about availability around them, or if they break? Yeah, sometimes people, maybe I've seen some agents that have broken, maybe I've broken a few agents in my time as well. Hopefully not. But it's for them, it's about they're operating a business process. That business process is the act and performance service desk practice. Some organisations, for example, have procurement within IT, sometimes in finance, sometimes separately. But if you've got a business process, data protection, information security, yeah, sometimes that's within IT. They're operating a business process. That business process will have to have unique outcomes. It's delivering a value to the user community, and will have probably predefined more KPIs rather than service commitments. So KPIs for the service desk will be time to pick up. Yeah, first contact resolution. Those are the types of things you want to have a look at rather than talking about availability 99%. Okay, so that's your 7 categories. I appreciate that's only a 15-minute overview of a very powerful theory. That theory is now going to be used back into that retail case study with Pets at Home, which I'm going to go through now. And this is time and time tested over the last 15, 20 years in lots of different organizations. And it really helps to set the expectation around the services that you are there to manage. Yeah, so everything else follows. We talked about incident requests, but we've got event monitoring, alerting. Someone's here around that. Absolutely, you've got to have this in place to be able to monitor the potential issues that are occurring that sit under the bonnet of these services, particularly these ones here. Yeah, all that background stuff cannot happen effectively unless you've got this in place first. Any further questions before I move on?
Just wanted to make a comment, really. I didn't want this to come across as a shameless plug, but I'm speaking later, and I think the success of AI and ITSM tools relies heavily on context, the right context for your organisation. And I think one of the tools that supplies that context is absolutely the service catalog in the way that you've described it. There are other things that provide that context, like CMDB. Tune in later, guys, and I'll elaborate further. But you know, that is an absolute critical one, because it's not tangible necessarily, a lot of the things that are in there. I think that is a really critical point, because the desktops and what I would call things with a plug on the end of them, they're tangible and discoverable, you can find them.
Yes.
But for the things that are listed there, perhaps just need audience thinking how many of those things are tangible and easily understandable.
Exactly.
You've got to do the legwork to get to that.
You absolutely do. I'm going to come on to the mapping bit in a minute, which will bring it to life even further, but it is great. It's got to come back to that definition of what someone can physically see, use and interact with. But that may be a conglomerate of lots of different components that sit underneeth it. So that's a critical.
1048 and 2 consultants agree with one another.
Very rare. Very rare.
I think that's exactly why we invited him to speak on this and scheduled it at this point in the day. I'm looking forward to your amazing presentation later.
Just
very quick. Is this sort of taxonomy built into set the tool sets, or did you guys come up with this as sort of meta framework that can be implemented in ServiceNow or
in short, the latter.
Right.
So this is agnostic to all tool sets. It aligns to CSDM 5.0 for those that are using ServiceNow. It aligns to the other data taxonomies that exist within the other tool sets as well. But what it's come from, it's been born from, first of all, practical application. Yeah, it's not a theory as such, but we've taken the models that come from ITIL and ISO and COVID and others to exactly and create something that's meaningful to people.
Just to put a little bit of context into that, because I saw you doing the slides previously, right? And you were very generous to allow me to utilize this slide and what might be following. When I've been going through with my clients about what they need to be putting into their service catalogues, this has fundamentally changed the way in which I approach talking and the way that they then think through, and the quality of the data that we get back. There's a tool implemented. It's like, well, here's a spreadsheet. I don't actually care too much what you put into it, but I need the data to load in. It's really helped people to move forward, because what you find is that most people are not experts in building this out.
No.
So this level of guidance is really, really helpful.
It's taken away, computers is science. This is an art. Yeah, it's a different lens on what we do within IT.
And I think the power in it is the based on at the bottom. It's how each of them operates or works in a different way, or needs to function in a different way as far as servicing those services.
Yep, indeed.
Chris, I think this you point firstly back to business processes.
Yes.
Do they ever align with things like TOGAF or other enterprise architecture frameworks? So can you almost put your enterprise architecture framework here and tie this catalog in?
Absolutely. We call that business process line service management, which is in nirvana state you want to get to. Full mapping of business capability to business process. Your mega processes down to level 5s, which then map to your IT services, which will be these ones. And then you've got a clear line of sight. A little box somewhere sitting in a data center, all the way up to overall business capability. That's where you want to get to. That's level 5 maturity. Okay, I'm conscious of probably, I think we're okay to overrun for 10 minutes, aren't we? So I don't know how long have I got left. Okay. There we go. Thank you very much. Just very quick before I get on these, for these services, application which is most prevalent, we've got a blueprint that recommends 72 different attributes to capture against those services, and naming conventions. Really important. Have a naming convention. Make it so it's real, not an acronym. The amount of times I join organizations, it takes me a month to get my head around an acronym of a service. Yeah, make it real. Make it what's called the Ronseal principle. Apologies for those that haven't seen the Ronseal advert. You know exactly what it says on the tin. And make it clear, because if it's going to appear in a report that goes to a senior exec, the senior exec probably isn't going to know the code name either. If it's about the performance of that service, or maybe the cost of the service, level 4 maturity, getting to proper service-based costing, you want to have it meaningful, really, really meaningful. You don't want to have a load of scripts and text that go with it. Service owner, who owns it? Critical. Business service owner, who from the business is receiving the service and responsible for the strategy and the future direction of it. Yeah, and 69 other different attributes that you might want to capture, of which is about 15, which we say you really should mandatory. Others are optional depending on the maturity of your organization. Okay. Right, I'll whip through the remaining steps. Service criticality. So you've now defined your services. Pets at Home went through a long list. Brain dumps, everyone's in their heads, what services they have, existing spreadsheets they had, their tool set they had some services there as well. We just got it all out. Right, put it on the table. We then whittled it down. Does it meet the definition of a service which you've all agreed to? No. Yes, it does. Oh, actually, that needs to be split out. That's just that's a capability rather than actually an IT service. Yeah, so we started going through that. Usually about 3 workshops is what you need, a couple of hours in each, and you can get to a really good first list. You then need to do a criticality assessment, finite resources. You can't go and do a risk assessment on everything. Yeah, large operation, lots of change, finite resources. You need to prioritize. And to prioritize, you do a criticality assessment. So you take your services and go, right, which ones are my most important? Now, this isn't just a voting mechanism. Yeah, this isn't a bum fight where everyone, that's the most important service. It's usually the person that shouts loudest will win. So you need to have an objective criteria.
Do you find, though, that when you do that, you end up with a different answer to what the BCP is saying?
It's a BCP business continuity plan. Yeah. In short, yes, again, it will do, but they should inform each other. Yeah, so the criticality assessment should be, ultimately you should be doing assessment on your business processes, your capabilities in TOGAF architecture, and then you link it to the IT service underneath it, in which then you inherit the importance, the criticality from the business processes it's operating from. Yeah. But lots of organizations don't have that maturity. So you go in at the IT service, you go, right, let's do a criticality assessment on the IT service.
You often find that C-level or higher level sort of management idea of what is critical is very different to people on the ground, because a lot of the time people will say something like Microsoft Word is critical for a business, but if you look at C-level, they'll go, well, we're a software company, so our, for example, Salesforce or other CRM tool is business critical. Do you ever find
Yes.
that? Yeah.
Yes, and not just between different levels of seniority, but just different peers have different opinions depending on what they're using. So we have something that's called a criticality assessment. It's set criteria, usually 6 or 7 different criteria: legs and regs, reputation, brand, internal operational, sales, loss of revenue. They're typical criteria that I'm sure some of you may be in the BIA, the business impact assessment for BCPs that you're alluding to. But you just need to make sure you've got the criteria well defined up front. You can tweak it later on, yeah, maybe, but not too much, because otherwise you've got to do a massive reassessment all over again. But get the criteria up front agreed, trial it, pilot with one, which is what we did in this scenario. And then from there, you can then create the criticality tiers of service. I'm going to run out of time to go through that in a bit too much detail, but this is the start of translating percentages. So a tier 1 being your 4 nines. You translate it to the number of minutes and hours that you are allowing, permissible, to be unavailable per month. So for example, a 24/7 service with a tier 1 99.99, that equates to 4 minutes of unavailability per month. Is that okay? Yeah, for some says, if you went to the banking sector, you probably could start off with your 5 minutes, 5 nines, sorry, rather than your 4 nines. Yeah, or financial service banking is a bit too precise. Yeah, because of the real low latency, the regulations that are required there. Others, 4 minutes may be too much, in which case the cost will be too high. You go for a tier 1, you've got to have active-to-active failover solutions, you've got to have synchronized data, you've got to have really robust contracts in place with third parties that might support it. Yeah, dollar signs, pound signs going up and up and up. Whereas your tier 4, anyone from HR in here? Apologies for anyone watching later on down here. Your HR system is typically a tier 4 service because it can be unavailable for a day or two, and not many people will shout. Certain times of the year, maybe that's not acceptable, but yeah, most of the time that's okay. You therefore don't want to pay the cost of having a hugely available service when you can actually use something that's a little bit less available. Okay, so assess your services. From that list, we came up with 5, no, it wasn't, it's 12 critical services for pets at home. And then we put those 12 services through a service mapping exercise. Service mapping is saying, right, okay, this is the service. What's underneath it? What makes it operate? So you go down into your application layer. You might have multiple applications. You could have a functional app, a security app, a messaging app, a data feed app. These things that enable the entire service to operate and do something. And then you go down. If it's hosted on-prem, what's the, which data center is it in, and what's the tin it sits on? Yeah, you've got to do the full mapping. There's a bit of a spiderweb diagram. I'm not going to go through it in detail today. This is a genuine example of going IT service layer all the way down to the components underneath it, but also importantly going up. Who uses it? Make it real again. This is about creating value for users. Understand who's using it and how and why are they using it. And this can be in the back pocket of the service owner at all times. You should also very much then go into your CMDB, plug maybe for the sessions later on this afternoon, and then under change control in the CMDB. Some of the stuff you can discover using discovery tools, whether that's within your existing server management platform or other third-party products you can plug in. Others, they're configuration items, they're virtual. Yeah, it's about stitching together a map. It's not necessarily just stuff, just kit you can discover. Is it okay? On to number 4, you can then do risk assessments. Okay, this particular use case was then going in, understand my risk. Clearly here you could stop and say, I've done my service catalog now and all the other benefits and go with it, which I'm happy to chat to you about maybe during lunch. This is about the risk. So you could then say, I know my components now of my 12 critical services. I'm going to now go and conduct a technical assessment of those components. So what about the technical data resiliency? Monitoring alerting capabilities. Have I got something in there that's going to tell me proactively that there are issues that have been experienced? Support structure effectiveness, both the internal and third party. Service continuity, disaster recovery capabilities. What's in play? And you literally map the whole thing out of every component that underpins each of your 12 critical services. And from there on in, you've then got a holistic view. For my service, where do my risks sit? I've got a contract that's out of date, or it's a really low tier contract. I've not got any monitoring alerting in play. In which case I've got a gap in my observability of that particular service. So you've got your view now of where they sit. You then produce what we call a portfolio of projects to mitigate those risks. Yeah, what are the actions I now need to take to address the risks, the gaps in my capability that I've seen? Because you can say, right, I've got these tier 1 services, these 12 for pets at home, but actually based on my assessment, all of them came out as tier 4s or maybe tier 3s, in which case you need to adjust the gap. Now, pets at home at the time were like, yeah, absolutely, we need to address the gap. Some organisations we worked with over the time said, we need to address the gap. Yes, we don't have the money, or it's not high priority at the moment. What do you think the organisation should do if they generally don't have the money? It's a decision. Everyone's commercial, based or a commercial operation. What do you think they should then do if they don't choose to bring a service up from a tier 4 capability to a tier 1 need? What are the options?
Assign somebody that you're going to throw the book at.
I like that answer. I've got a slightly variation of that answer, if that's okay, but there's another one here.
From a cybersecurity perspective, you look at the risk and the threats, you say, well, what's the risk of this system going down? And what's the threat, aka the likelihood of it happening? So you might say it's a tier 1 system because if it goes down, we're all, may as well shut up shop. But actually the threat of that occurring might be quite low. It's only if somebody goes in the data center and trips over the power cable, for example.
Yep.
So you can do other things whilst you maintain and save, for want of a better word, save up to bring that up to a tier 1 capability. So I've seen, for example, customers say, well, we can't afford to put in the latest greatest file, but what we can do is get angry Alsatians haven't been fed for a week outside the data center to try and bite anybody who tries to go in. So it's that balanced approach on what's the risk of this going down versus what's the threat and likelihood of it occurring.
It's great, and both of them in the same space. Sorry, I'll come in a second. It's about risk, isn't it? They've accepted the risk by not investing in bringing it up. Maybe they go halfway. Maybe they bring it up to a tier 3 capability or tier 2 capability, but it's still not meeting the business need. But whenever there is a gap, add it to your risk log. It's great adding it to your risk log, but it's all about getting off your risk log as quickly as possible. If you add it to your risk log, it must have 2 things. 1, an owner. 3, book out. Yeah, maybe not in those kind of words, but absolutely the buck stops with that person. They made that decision for good reason at the time. The second thing, a review date. You shouldn't just sit there forever and a day. You should have a review date, whether that's 3 months, 6 months, whatever down in the future, and you say, has the world moved on? Has it changed? Have I now got the budget to do it? Maybe that system isn't as critical anymore, in which case we can accept that risk overall. Okay, so it's all about risk management. Sorry, sir.
Not at all. So I'm just going to jump on the bandwagon of promoting conversation later today. I'll be discussing value co-creation. And one of the things I'll talk about is labelling services fragile, which and within that, I'll discuss who you should assign that responsibility.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Good.
I also think that it's great, don't get me wrong, to assign a risk owner, but the risk owner must be empowered, because we've all been in situations where we've gone, for example, oh, Fred is the risk owner, and you look at Fred, and Fred's not actually a budget holder, or Fred doesn't have the ear of the CFO or whoever it is. Fred is just some project manager who sits in the corner. Who do
you think the risk owner should be if there's a gap? Who do you think it should be?
Somebody who...
There's a specific role I'm looking for here.
I think there's an answer you're looking for, and I think there's the answer that I would give. So I'll give the answer that I would give, which would be somebody with the empowerment to change it and somebody with the drive to change it. Because empowerment is one thing, but if nobody wants to change it.
Yeah.
But I think the answer you're looking for would be C-level or senior management.
Not necessarily. So there's a couple of roles I went through earlier.
You go up to the point where there's one person who manages both those areas, and that's the person who owns the risk.
Remember the attributes I talked about earlier, about 72 different attributes, and there are some that mandatory. What were the first couple I went through? Yeah, and there were 2 different types. Bang, bingo. The person who's getting the value from the service, ultimately, the person who was also making decisions around spend around that service. That's the person who should be owning that risk. Yeah, the IT service owner, once providing the service, would potentially own some of the actions that go against that. But it's the business service owner, coming to your point, and that could be at different levels of seniority. But the important thing is, whoever that business service owner is, they own that risk. Okay.
But
Sorry to double blow. Also talk about how you do it.
Perfectly said, because it's not about just a single individual. Yes, you need to have one. You should always have a single name, but it should be about a collective effort to ensure that you understand that risk and try and mitigate it as best as you possibly can, working within the constraints you have as an organisation.
If you look at it, and again, sorry, cybersecurity lens on it, but it's the most common thing in this sort of space. People get assigned a risk and they'll go, right, I own that risk, but they don't understand the risk they're owning. Or option B, they fully understand it and go, well, there's no way in 1,000 days of sunny weather, Sundays and everything, where I'm going to have the budget to fix that risk. But they get lumped with it because they're the most appropriate person at the time.
It should be lumped with someone. It should be someone that can make a reasoned decision around how they take it forward. In this particular case study, this little map came through, a probability and impact, all the conversations earlier around risk assessments, probability, impact, proximity is your third dimension usually you bring into it. And you can map these out. So right, these little squares were all projects to mitigate the risks across those 12 critical services. You had the size of them representing the cost, you had the probability and impact that went with them as well. So you can map them out, create a portfolio of work. And once you've done that, you execute them and you continually improve it. How do you prevent it from getting back to that position of having to do a reasonable sized projects to do the assessment? Let's get that always embedded into your ways of working to ensure that you can manage your risks effectively and maintain your service catalogue. And there are some other improvements on the side of that as well around service management. You've done all this good work about your catalogue. You've done all this good work about your CMDB, then embed in change management. Let's harness the power of the service catalogue with your incident logging approach, with your service reporting, your costing and charging, all these other things you've now enabled because you've put effective service catalogues in place. Okay, I won't do the video. It is a bit cheesy, so it's probably saved me if anything. I'm happy to send it around later, but it just goes through in a bit of an animated fashion. What we did. I'll stop there. Given, is that okay?
Yeah,
That's fantastic.
Thank you.